Well, for more on Zimbabwe's economy, I spoke to Lloyd Msipa in London. Lloyd is a corporate lawyer, investment advisor, and commentator on African politics. He started by talking about how Zimbabwe is faring so far under President Mnangagwa.
It's a mixed bag, really, because remember, Mnangagwa inherited an economy that was pretty much in the doldrums. And the politics has always been the elephant in the room. Bring in Finance Minister Professor Mutuli. He has been hard at work, and the monetary policies have been coming through. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a wait and see, because the politics still need to come up to speed as well. So that I think is probably the major handicap.
So what would you say are the most pressing economic issues that Zimbabwe is facing at the moment?
Well, manufacturing has been, out cold since, for the last 10, 15 years. So we need to start exporting. So for you to export, you have to start manufacturing. And the sanctions have not helped, implemented by, Washington. The Zidera sanctions have not helped. So it is not as easy as that, because the loss of the Zimbabwe dollar due to inflation, and then bringing the monetary policy full circle for internal trade has been another big one. The shortage of foreign currency, which is the US dollar that we use, has been another big one. So it's a mixed bag of challenges that are coming across from all sectors, agriculture, mining, trade, and other sectors.
And as we look at the currency, talk about the journey that it's taking and what options Zimbabwe has on the table right now to address it.
Well, you saw in the last couple of weeks that the finance minister introduced what they call the RTGS, which is basically electronic money. The idea is to try and stabilize what a parallel market that had developed over the years. So that was probably the stage after that is probably to introduce the Zimbabwe dollar, so that Zimbabweans can actually trade with the outside companies. So at this point, it's at a transition point. The RTGS is meant to stabilize the economics of the country while the manufacturing is brought up to speed. Now,
you mentioned the sanctions. Just how much have U.S. sanctions affected Zimbabwe's economy?
Well, in a very, very big way. You are aware that even the neighbors, our countries that would generally help us, cannot help us because of the sanctions. You know the impact of the sanctions, the Zidera. What they do is through OFAC, your Office of Asset Control, make it impossible for any company to do business with Zimbabwe because of the sanctions. Even our neighbors in South Africa, as you noticed, Ramaphosa was in Harare the last few hours. They cannot even offer us, a bailout formally because of the sanctions. Because remember, every dollar, every international transaction passes through America. So we are between a rock and a hard stone.
And we did see President Ramaphosa of South Africa offering his support, not just for Zimbabwe's economy, but also for the lifting of sanctions. Just how important is intra-African trade to really helping Zimbabwe's economy?
Intra-African trade is important, but remember, the world is now a global village. So those sanctions do have an overreaching effect on how much trade Zimbabwe can do with South Africa. Remember, South Africa is our biggest trading partner. But to date, you find that there's a misbalance between what goes out to South Africa and what comes into Zimbabwe. So we are largely importers of South African product. If you like, one calls Zimbabwe a South African supermarket, and we're not exporting anything as Zimbabwe. So that itself presents a challenge. He was there in Zimbabwe in the last few hours, and he says he's prepared to give Zimbabwean products a market. But Zimbabweans are not producing anything. There's a need for an industrial startup, or probably a Marshall Plan of sorts.
And looking at the resources that Zimbabwe does have, especially when we're looking at changes in the mining industry, what should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, Zimbabwe has over 66 different types of minerals. So ideally, if you notice, the Minister of Finance has actually gone out of his way and said, look, foreign investors can now come into Zimbabwe and own 100% of their investment. Or this is an attempt to lure the investments in the face of sanctions. hopefully get people to bypass the sanctions and come and invest in Zimbabwe. That is probably the only way investors could come in. But many have been talking about internal investment as another way of bringing Zimbabwe out of the economic meltdown, that we encourage local companies to invest in their own country. And only then may we get investors to come into Zimbabwe.